All right, so a lot of times when you're thinking about like, man, I gotta do a pan for a background, right? Or you gotta do a camera move. If you're doing your camera move in Harmony, pretty simple. If you didn't see the previous thumbnails, I just turned them off. But there's another video on YouTube that's just the thumbnails and the process of getting to this stage. So once you get to this stage where you've determined what your style is, but you think to yourself, oh man, this has got to be a camera move. You can cheat. Oh, that sounds terrible. I hate saying that. Cheat. So you can, at this point, you can, if you need to, you can copy and paste bits and pieces that you need, of course, because it's vector. Like, why wouldn't you? Why would you do the extra work? And since the camera is going to be moving by it, it's not like, I mean, there's very few people that are going to pick up on that. Oh yeah, that's just a repeat of things that are already there. So in this case, I just extended whatever was already there because it would be easier than creating a whole new thing. In general, though, if this was a real shot, there would be more time and energy and thought put into like how and what is the character doing that requires the camera to move, and how can I set this up in a way to where the character is going to be passing either by or through elements that are important, essential. But for the sake of this video, I'm just setting up a foreground, middle ground, background. When you have things that are not outdoors or natural, you have to make your multiplane a little bit more subtle than if it's an outdoor situation, because outdoors it's more likely that there's a greater degree of depth between the foreground, middle ground, background. And that parallaxing effect will look a little bit more believable and natural. The more elements that you have on the floor plane, the harder this is to like. So if you have tile or any decorative floor things, it often makes your multiplane sometimes look a little odd. The effect won't be as noticeable when you have characters move across it most of the time. So always kind of keep that in mind. So once you've got clarity on your design, now it's just time to do the work. If someone is giving you a sketch, or if you didn't think through what the separation would look like between your layers, you now have to invent some elements. Important note that this is not a clean background still. This is still a fairly rough drawing. So the important thing though is that you've got to think through the potential that when the camera moves, that these elements may be revealed. So there's no element in here, or there's no part in these separate layers where you can just decide, I don't feel like drawing things, so I'm just gonna leave that as it is. Like, you have to draw past everything, because there's always the potential that you may not be the person that's truly setting up how this camera is going to move, and the accuracy of what the speed will look like, and how much depth that may be required from the shot or scene. So you've got to draw your background in its entirety, so that when that camera moves, if it reveals a part of the background, that everything that gets revealed has been designed, has been drawn, etc., etc. So that's probably the more challenging part of doing the multiplanes, is that in your initial planning, most people in general are just thumbnailing the background as it is, and they're not really thinking about, care about, or concerned with what's behind walls or what's behind, certain objects or elements. So that's the element that gets a little bit, I don't want to say aggravating, but there's a little bit of aggravation to it, because there's times where in the thumbnailing phase or in the initial sketching phase, you're not even sure what some of those things are. Like, the stuff that's behind this wall, I have no idea what it is. And so what I probably should do is I probably should have added in maybe some other bodily kind of things or something, because it's like a prohibition sort of warehouse where they're basically brewing their illicit alcohol. And so trying to keep the consistency of the stylization of the sort of wonkiness as well is part of the process, and it's part of the thinking. And the important thing is that you're really trying as much as you possibly can to flesh out parts that haven't been fleshed out or thought about. Even at this stage, you're still potentially designing, so you're still thinking about how can I retain as much of the sort of oddness and wonkiness of things especially if you're potentially not the person that did the thumbnail. But in this case, you're doing the thumbnail. I did this thumbnail, so I could have thought through all those things and elements, but why? No, initially the idea wasn't, hey, I'm gonna multiplane this, but for the sake of, because I've already did thumbnails, there's no point in doing a whole nother complete design if I just want to explain how you would set up this multiplane camera move, basically. So I just took the thumbnail that I had and decided, let's flesh it out. So the fleshing out part really is just you taking the time out and saying, what are elements that I can add in here that's going to give this a little bit more believability, that'll make it look like people have been here, that they've been doing whatever they're doing, and that you can flesh it out to the best of your capability. That's most of what this part of the process is going to be. So I'll probably speed this up a little bit more so you're not necessarily bored with watching the drawing part of this, but that's ultimately the goal. And then just adding in those extra bits of little textural things that make it feel, again, like one of the goals that at least you maybe would want to consider is making it feel like believable, right? And that usually means that there's a little bit of sort of chaos. So what I did was I went and changed the line weight so that the line weight of stuff far in the background won't be the same line weight as the things in the middle ground, and the things in the foreground won't have the same line weight as the things in the middle ground or the background. So line weight matters, because the heavier the line weight, oftentimes the closer something will feel. The lighter the line weight, the further it will feel away from you. It's not super important at this phase though, because this is still like development phase where I'm still thinking through things and adding stuff, parts, pieces, elements to maintain that believability. But I have separated this out, so now I'm working in the middle ground. So this is a complete layer by itself that's just middle ground, and I turned the background off so that I can only work on developing all of this middle ground stuff. And the same concept is important here. And I think the entirety of this process of doing foreground, middle ground, background, like redrawing it, I think it might have, the entirety of this video, like not sped up, I think it's like an hour and a half. And then the initial background, I think that was another like 2 hours. So and then the thumbnails, I think the thumbnails were like 35-45 minutes. So right now we're probably looking at about 3 to 4 hours in total. And that's all just making up stuff, right? This is not final at all yet. This is all still, I'm drawing rapidly. And I find that the faster you draw, the faster your decision making is, the less noodling you'll do, and the more that you'll get through things rapidly, and you'll just make decisions about this feels good and this works, as opposed to trying to make things perfect. This sounds bad, but when you're doing this background art, a part of it is not, I'm trying to create flawless perfection, unless for some reason that's an absolutely important, essential element to the design. But more than that, what is important is I'm really trying to get as many of the elements in there as much as I possibly can, and I'm trying to make this feel as natural as I possibly can, and not overdo it so that it becomes a distraction for once characters are in there, because there is a point where you can make these so busy that once characters are in there that nothing really resonates. So all of the elements are drawn, your foreground, your middle ground, or background, it's all drawn out. So the real fun part, so you can see I added a peg and I put the camera on a peg, and part of the reason that you have to put the camera on a peg is because I want to set keyframes on it. And in order to set a keyframe, you actually have to create a peg, and then you have to put the camera on the peg. Make sure you go to the far upper right corner and make sure you do display all, so that you get that you're able to manipulate and add a peg. So this is really simple. All I did was set a keyframe, and then I went to the advanced animation tools at the top, across the top of the screen, and then I just moved the view so that I would then have that little field far to the right and the field far to the left. That's all that happened there. So nothing magical. And you have to make sure that you extend the frames for your art too, because if you don't extend the frames for your art, you're actually not panning across anything. You only have art on frame 1 and the rest of the frames are blank. So you make sure you extend your frames, and then you're setting a keyframe at frame 1. And initially I think I set a keyframe at 60, and when I played it back it was way too fast, so I was like, nah, I gotta slow this down. So to make this multiplane effect work, you have to go to the top view, and then you're going to select the maintain scale button. It's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th one across the top. And you can already see that there's, the speed at which the background is moving. It's moving at different levels, or at a different pace. And all it is because I set back the background, and I set back the middle ground. I left the foreground where it was in the foreground. If you do not keep maintain size on and you're moving it back and forth, you can see that the size of things get bigger and smaller, and that's not what you want. So make sure you have that maintain size on. And the further you push your layers back in this top view, the further they'll be from the camera, and they'll move at a faster speed. So the things closer to you will stay, relatively, they'll move relatively slow, but the things that move further and further away from the camera will start to move a lot faster. So you want to be conscious of how far back you're pushing things. The beauty of this is it's not the old-fashioned way where you have to calculate the steps of your character. You have to be very conscious of their movement and pacing, that you can cheat. I'm sorry, I think conceptually it's flipped the other way. I think the foreground stuff moves faster than the background stuff. Duh. And so the foreground stuff, if the closer it is to the camera, the faster it'll move, and the background stuff, the further it is from the camera, the slower it'll move. So keep that in mind. And the important thing though is that you have to really you could play around and tweak the speed and pacing as much as you want, which is really cool. So you don't have to worry about being perfect. And keep in mind too, like, you can import art from Photoshop as long as you have transparency on the layers, and then you can stack them in Harmony as well. Or you could do the same thing in Premiere, After Effects. You could do this exact same thing in After Effects or Premiere in a pretty similar way. So that's your multiplane camera. Easy peasy.